The night stretched long and silent over the northern plains of America, where fields rolled like quiet waves beneath the pale silver of the moon. The wind whispered secrets through the tall grasses, brushing against abandoned barns and deserted rail crossings, carrying with it a hum that seemed almost alive. In these hushed hours, when the world held its breath, the story of a lost train began, a story that had traveled through the whispers of countless generations, a tale that never truly ended, no matter how many years passed. They called it the midnight train to nowhere, a locomotive that vanished without warning from maps and memories, a train that some insisted glided along tracks that no longer existed. It was said that anyone who caught even a glimpse of its lights was forever touched by the mystery it carried, a gentle pull that lingered long after the echo of its whistle faded into the night. Long before the first sightings, the train had been a part of the ordinary world. Engine 101, as it was known to those who worked the rails, carried a small but devoted crew and a handful of passengers on what was supposed to be a routine journey. The engineer, Thomas Weller, had spent decades on the northern lines, knowing every turn, every rise and fall of the rails, every bend in the landscape, as though it were written into his memory. The train left the station under a clear sky, stars glimmering like distant lanterns, promising a night like any other. Yet, as the train pressed forward into the darkness, the air shifted. A sudden fog rolled over the plains, thick and almost liquid, swallowing distant lights and muffling the sound of the wheels. Shadows clung to the rails, dancing in the pale glow of the engine's headlamp, which flickered as though struggling against an unseen force. The crew noticed the change, a chill running through their bones, though the passengers remained blissfully unaware, absorbed in the gentle rocking of the cars and the soft, rhythmic chuffing of the engine. Then came a vibration, subtle at first, then stronger, shaking the very frame of the train. The whistle blew sharply, though no signal had been given, and Thomas peered into the fog. Ahead, the rails seemed to dissolve, stretching into a gray nothingness that defied explanation. He called for the brakes, but the train moved as though caught in a current knot of this world. The final moments were brief and incomprehensible. Engine 101 and everyone aboard disappeared into the mist, leaving behind nothing but silence and a lingering sense of loss. For weeks, search parties combed the surrounding countryside. Families and authorities scoured every mile of track, every stretch of prairie, every abandoned station along the line. They found nothing, no twisted metal, no signs of derailment, not even the faintest trace of a wheel mark in the earth. As the days turned to months, and the months into years, the story became legend, passed from one generation to the next in hushed tones, a tale that grew richer with each retelling. It was not long before the first sightings began. Farmers working late into the night spoke of distant lights moving across their fields, accompanied by a rhythmic chuffing that seemed to float above the ground. Travelers on the northern highways recounted encounters with a faint, glowing train moving silently beside their vehicles, its windows dark and filled with shadowy figures whose eyes seemed to pierce the veil of reality. The fog carried whispers, soft conversations, and distant laughter, echoing faintly like a lullaby. both comforting and unsettling. Those who claimed to see the train often spoke of the phantom conductor, a figure standing at crossings or along the tracks, dressed in a faded uniform with a lantern casting a gentle blue light. He moved with deliberate slowness, his gestures both warning and guiding. Some believed he was Thomas Weller himself, bound to the train by some unbroken thread of duty or fate, while others considered him a guardian of those who might wander too close to the path of the midnight train. His presence was never threatening, only enigmatica, spectral guide in a world of uncertainty. The train's appearances were erratic. It emerged on nights thick with fog, when the moon was thin or hidden behind clouds, or on dates long marked in history as anniversaries of its final departure. Some theorists proposed that the train had slipped through time itself, existing in a dimension slightly out of phase with our own, intersecting the present only at moments when the boundaries weakened. Others suggested that it carried its passengers in a liminal state, suspended between life and death, moving along rails that were no longer part of the physical world. Inside the train, the passengers remained forever in motion, yet never arrived. Shadows of men, women, and children pressed against the fogged windows, their faces etched with longing or sorrow. Some were recognizable to those who knew old family photos, while others were strangers who had vanished under mysterious circumstances long ago. The air carried their voices, sometimes faint, melodic whispers that seemed to tell stories of lives unfinished, of journeys interrupted, of moments lost to time. Occasionally, a hand would brush against the window, leaving behind a faint chill, a reminder that the line between the living and the lost was thinner than most could imagine. Over the decades, more encounters were recorded. Truckers driving the lonely highways spoke, vibration beneath their wheels, followed by a light appearing alongside them, only to vanish when glanced at directly. Children walking home from school claimed to hear soft footsteps on gravel where no path existed, and hunters in the northern forests reported fleeting glimpses of a train glowing faintly among the trees. The legend grew, evolving into a narrative both terrifying and strangely comforting, as if the midnight train existed to remind the living that some mysteries were meant to endure. Scientists and skeptics have attempted to rationalize these occurrences, proposing optical illusions, atmospheric anomalies, or even collective hallucinations. Yet, for those who have experienced it firsthand, the train is very real. The hum of the engine, the soft vibration beneath the earth, the faint blue glow of the lanternal persist in memory long after the sighting ends. Some say that listening carefully on foggy nights, one can hear a distant whistle that carries across the plains, a haunting yet gentle reminder of a world that lies just beyond our own. The train is not merely a vehicle, it is a keeper of stories. Each passenger aboard Engine 101 carries a narrative frozen in unfinished dreams, lost loves, abandoned hopes, echoing through the empty cars. They move endlessly, their journey eternal, guided by a conductor who neither speaks nor judges, merely watches, and perhaps waits for the day when their story will be understood. As the midnight train glides across the landscape, it becomes a bridge between past and present, a thread weaving through memory and imagination. Its path is invisible to most, yet unmistakable to those attuned to the subtle signs, the faint rattle of rails, the shimmer of fog, the soft blue lantern hovering in the distance. In a world rushing toward dawn, the train reminds us of stillness, of quiet reflection, of the beauty and mystery that linger. When the lights go out and the earth holds its breath, in the end, the midnight train to nowhere is more than a story, it is an experience. A journey through time and memory, a whisper in the night that invites those willing to listen. It passes without arrival, appears without warning, yet leaves behind a sense of wonder that endures, far longer than the fleeting moments of its manifestation. Some say it travels between dimensions. Others claim it is a haunting, yet all agree on one truth. The midnight train is eternal, a legend that rides on the winds of the night, waiting for anyone ready to hear its call. And if, on some quiet evening, you find yourself alone by abandoned tracks or walking beneath the foggy moonlight, pause and listen. Perhaps, just perhaps, you will hear the gentle hum of the midnight train, the soft chuffing of a ghostly engine, the whispers of passengers long gone, yet still traveling, forever moving, forever seeking, forever mysterious. The night deepens, the world grows still, and the train continues its eternal journey. A reminder that some mysteries are too wondrous to ever truly end. In the quiet expanse of the American Midwest, where open fields stretch so far that the horizon seems to melt into the sky, there once existed a railway line that no longer appears in any official map, not in government records, not in transportation archives, not even in the old newspapers that once proudly announced its construction. It was a line that people swore they had seen, a line where a dark iron train ran through the night like a whisper in motion. Yet somehow, slowly, silently, both the train and its tracks faded from the memory of an entire region. Tonight, as you settle into rest, let me take you softly through that forgotten story, a tale so gentle and so strangely soothing that its mystery might drift you into sleep before you even realize you're dreaming. The story begins more than a century ago, in a town that itself has almost disappeared, Harrow Ridge, Illinois. It wasn't a particularly important town. It wasn't big, nor rich, nor famous. It was simply peaceful. The sort of place where the air carried the smell of warm wheat in summer, and where winters were quiet except for the slow crackling of frozen trees bending under the weight of snow. But to the people of Harrow Ridge, the world felt whole, complete, and full of promises, especially after the railway came. It was said that the railway line was built faster than any track in that era. Workers constructed it over a single summer, and even though there were no official government records of such a massive project, the townsfolk remembered the hammering, the shouting, the metal grinding, and the long caravans of workers. Everyone remembered the excitement of watching the tracks stretch further, each day until finally the first train arrived. It came at night, and that became its tradition. You see, this train never ran during the day. Only after the sun had disappeared behind the horizon did the engine awaken. People said the train wasn't loud, just a soft hum, like a distant storm moving across the plains. Some claimed the sound was comforting. Others said it felt strangely sad, like a voice calling out from the past. Still, the townsfolk grew to love it. Many farmers used the night train to send grain to faraway cities. Children would stay awake in their beds just to hear the faint rumble drifting through the dark. For decades, the train was part of life, predictable, steady, always on time. But then, one night, it simply didn't come. At first, people assumed there was a delay. Storm season often disrupted schedules. But the next night, there was no train, and the night after that, still nothing. The town grew anxious. Some walked toward the tracks to see if any damage had been done. Others waited beside the platform, holding lanterns, hoping the glow might catch the attention of the approaching engine. But all they saw was darkness, endless, silent darkness. Days passed, weeks passed, a month went by. The train never returned. Finally, a group of farmers decided to follow the tracks in hopes of reaching the next town and finding answers. But as they walked, something strange began to happen. The tracks seemed to grow more faded, not rusty, not broken. Faded like lines in a watercolor painting soaked by rain. And then, several miles from Harrow Ridge, the tracks simply ended. Not broken, not removed. They just stopped. Like someone had erased the rest of the line with a giant invisible hand. More men were sent to verify it. They all reported the same thing. The tracks ended abruptly, as if the world beyond that point had forgotten they were ever there. And then, slowly, the people of Harrow Ridge began forgetting to. It didn't happen all at once. People still talked about the train for months, but the next generation talked about it less, and the generation after that barely remembered anything. Only the oldest citizens kept insisting, with trembling voices, that they once heard a train passing through the night. But their grandchildren would simply smile politely, assuming it was a memory mixed with dreams. When Harrow Ridge finally became abandoned, decades later, due to economic collapse, the railway was no longer part of anyone's mind. By the time historians attempted to document the region, they found nothing. No records of construction, no newspaper articles, no blueprints, no mentions of a night train in any archive. Even the abandoned station someone swore had existed was nowhere to be found. Only a small clearing remained where it was supposed to stand, covered in tall grass, swaying gently in the wind. But here's where the mystery deepens. In 1993, a group of amateur railway historians were exploring old routes across the Midwest. One evening, near the overgrown fields of the former Harrow Ridge area, they heard something unusual, a low rumble, soft, steady, rhythmic. They followed the sound, pushing through tall grass, until they reached an open plain, and then they saw it. A black iron locomotive gliding across the empty field, without any tracks beneath it. Its wheels turned, but touched nothing. No steam rose, though the engine glowed faintly like embers in a dying fire. It moved silently for several seconds, its windows dark as though nobody were inside. Then, as the historians stood frozen in awe, the train passed in front of the man, vanished into thin air. No smoke, no light, no fading silhouette, just gone. When they reported the incident, no one believed them. Their photos turned out blank. Their audio recorders captured only wind. Their maps showed no record of a railway ever being there. But a year later, a truck driver passing that same field late at night reported seeing lights floating in the fog like small orbs, gliding parallel to each other in a straight line. as though following a track that no longer existed. He slowed his truck, rolled down his window, and claims he heard a faint hum, exactly like the sound of a distant train. And so, the story began spreading again quietly, softly, like a whispered legend, shared only at night. Locals now call it the midnight train to nowhere, a train that moves without rails, a train that still follows its old route, even though the world around it has erased its path from maps and memory. Some say it appears only to those who are lost. Some say it carries the dreams of people who wander the plains at night. Others believe it is a memory itself, something that refuses to disappear completely, even when forgotten by everyone else. And perhaps that is why you're hearing this story tonight, because some mysteries don't vanish, they simply wait. They linger in the quiet places, in the soft hours before sleep, in the spaces between what is remembered and what is forgotten. Maybe right now, far away across the dark fields of America, that forgotten engine is still gliding through the night, soundless, trackless, timeless, setching invisible lines across the land. Perhaps if you listen closely, in the moments just before you drift into sleep, you might hear it too. A faint hum in the distance, a soft vibration like a heartbeat moving through the earth, calling gently across time. Not to frighten, but to remind that some stories live on, even when everything else disappears. And tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and your breathing slows, let the vanishing rails fade softly into your dreams, carrying you gently and peacefully into the quiet mystery of the night. Night settled quietly over the old American Midwest. The land was still, the sky was moonless, and the abandoned railroad towns felt more silent than usual. That night felt different, as if the darkness itself was waiting for something. At the small town of Briar Ridge, Engine 101 prepared for its final midnight journey, though no one knew it would be the last. The black iron locomotive released slow curls of steam that disappeared into the cold air. The fog rolled in thick, wrapping the train in a pale blanket. Conductor Samuel Reed walked alongside the train with his lantern. Sam had been working the rails for 20 years, and he trusted his instincts more than any map. That night, something felt wrong. He couldn't explain it, but the quiet pressed too heavily on his chest. Inside the passenger cars, 24 travelers settled in for the overnight ride. A mother and her little daughter sat near the middle. A soldier, returning home, rested his head against the window. A writer jotted notes in her journal, unaware she would soon write her final words. The station master warned Sam that the fog was unusually dense near Clearwater Bend. Sam nodded, even though the unease inside him continued to grow. At 12:07 a.m., the whistle of Engine 101 echoed through the empty valley. Some said later that the whistle didn't sound normal. It sounded almost like a cry. The train began to move, rolling slowly, its wheels clanking rhythmically as the fog swallowed it whole. The first few miles were uneventful. Sam walked through the aisles, checking on passengers. Everything looked normal until the little girl tugged at his jacket. She asked him who the man outside the window was. Sam froze. They were moving at high speed, deep into the fog. There should not have been anyone outside, but when Sam turned to look, there was nothing there. Only white fog sliding past like smoke. The girl insisted she had seen a man waving at her. Sam tried to smile, but the cold feeling in his spine didn't fade. He returned to the crew cabin. The fog outside had grown so thick it looked solid. The engine lights barely reached a few feet ahead. Something about the silence inside the train felt heavy, unnatural. At 12:39 a.m., the train approached Clearwater Bend. Every conductor knew this was the most dangerous curve. The rule was always the same: slow down, keep alert, listen to the tracks. But the moment they entered the bend, the engine lights flickered and died. Darkness fell over the locomotive like a blanket. The sound of the engine dulled, as if something was muffling it. Passengers sat upright. The soldier gripped the seat tightly. The little girl buried her face against her mother. A soft whisper traveled through the cars. It did not sound like metal or wind. It sounded like someone exhaling slowly right next to every passenger's ear. The whisper said, "Stop, turn back." Panic began to rise. The train jolted violently. People screamed. Something dragged the locomotive sideways, as if a giant hand had pushed it. When the engineer looked at the controls, every gauge showed 0. The engine pressure was 0. The speed was 0. The sensors showed no connection, and yet the train was moving faster than ever. The fog outside twisted like a living thing. The whisper grew louder. "Not this way. You don't belong here." A shadowy figure appeared outside the windows, tall and pale, with glowing eyes like old lanterns. It raised its hand slowly and pointed ahead. Passengers screamed. Sam rushed toward the front cabin. The engineer shouted that the brakes were not responding. The fog suddenly split in front of them. The tracks ended in midair, like they had been cut away. Beyond that was only darkness. Sam reached for the emergency brake. The whisper roared through the train. Too late, everything went black. At dawn, search teams inspected the valley. The tracks were perfect. No marks, no broken wood, no sign of a crash. But the strangest part was that the official rail maps no longer showed the route. The line engine 101 was supposed to travel had vanished from every map, every document, every archive. It was as if the route had never existed at all. Locals nearby reported hearing a faint whistle on foggy nights at exactly 12:07 a.m. It was old, hollow, and filled with sadness. Some people who listened closely said they could hear voices in the whistle. They heard passengers calling out. They heard a crew shouting warnings. They heard a little girl whisper, "He's waving at me." Engine 101 never arrived. Engine 101 never crashed. Engine 101 simply disappeared. But sometimes at night, the fog glows faintly, as if lit from within. And those who are unlucky enough to be near Clearwater Bend may see the faint outline of a train gliding over invisible rails. Passengers, still trapped inside, repeating their final journey endlessly. The whistle carries a final warning through the valley. Turn back before you vanish to... When night falls over the forgotten American plains, there is a strange kind of quiet that settles on the land, heavy, thick, almost unnatural. In most places, darkness simply covers the world like a blanket. But along the abandoned railroad known only as the Silent Line, darkness feels alive, as if it is watching, listening, waiting for something to return. Locals who live near this stretch of dead track rarely talk about it. Some pretend they don't know anything about it. Some whisper warnings, and a few old-timers, those who still remember, The stories their parents told say the same strange thing. After midnight, the rails hum, not like a machine, more like a heartbeat. This story begins with a traveler named Caleb Turner, a quiet man from Minnesota who spent most of his life searching for places that time had forgotten. He wasn't an explorer with big ambitions. He was simply fascinated by things the modern world abandoned: dulled bridges, empty towns, decaying barns, and railroad lines that once carried life across the country. If something had a story hidden beneath dust and rust, Caleb wanted to find it. He heard about the silent line from an old railroad enthusiast forum. Just one comment, one sentence: "No trains have run there since '73, but the tracks still sing at night." There were no photos, no explanations, no details, just whispers, and that was enough for Caleb. He arrived in Montana in late October, when the cold creeps in early and the nights are brutally long. His old truck rumbled along a gravel road until the GPS froze, then shut off completely. His phone battery, fully charged that morning, suddenly dropped to 1%. He cursed under his breath and looked up at the landscape. The world felt empty. Endless fields of dry grass stretched toward a distant ridge, and the sky was already turning gray with the last hints of sunset. Then he saw it, two thin rails, half buried in weeds, stretching across the land like forgotten scars. The silent line. Caleb stepped out of the truck and immediately felt a strange coldness in the air. Not the normal evening chill, something deeper, sharper, like walking into a freezer. The wind wasn't blowing, but the cold wrapped around him like a warning. He knelt next to the track and touched it. The metal felt colder than ice, and then he felt it, a faint vibration. Not strong, not loud, just the tiniest tremor, as if something far away was moving along the rails. A smile flickered across his face. "Old metal shifting," he whispered. "That's all. Must be the weather." But deep inside, he knew something was different. He followed the tracks, walking slowly, recording on his handheld camera. The sun dipped below the horizon. The last orange glow disappeared. By the time he had walked half a mile, true night had fallen, and darkness swallowed the plains. Then it happened. A sound drifted across the fields, soft, distant, unmistakable. A train horn, not a modern horn. An old, deep, echoing blast that belonged to the era of steam. It rolled across the land like thunder, long and mournful. Caleb stopped walking. His breath turned to fog. His fingers went numb. "Impossible," he whispered. No trains had run here in 50 years. The rails beneath his boots vibrated, again stronger now. A rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. He crouched, pressing his palm against the cold steel. It felt alive. The sound of wheels grinding on tracks drifted through the dark. Slow at first, then faster, louder, stronger. Caleb looked down the tracks and saw nothing, no lights, no engine, just darkness stretching endlessly into the distance. But the sound was real. The vibration was real. Something was moving. He kept walking, slowly at first, then faster. The tracks curved ahead and disappeared into a cluster of dead trees. Their branches hung low, twisted and sharp like claws. As Caleb approached the trees, his flashlight flickered. Once, twice, then shut off completely. He hit it with his palm. Nothing, not even a dim glow. The batteries were brand new. A soft, metallic ting came from behind him. He spun around. Nothing, but the tracks were vibrating harder now. The sound grew louder. The air thickened. Then he heard voices, faint, layered, echoing, crying, whispering, calling for help. Caleb froze. The silhouettes appeared next, dozens of them, standing along the tracks, as if waiting for a train that would never come. Men, women, children, some wearing clothes from the 1970s, old coats, torn jackets, dresses that fluttered in a wind that wasn't blowing. One figure, a man with a hat, lifted his arm and pointed down the tracks. A single whisper escaped his lips. "It's coming." The ground began to shake. A blinding white headlight exploded into view far down the track, cutting through the darkness like a blade. The sound of the engine roared like a thunderstorm. The ground trembled. The air turned hot. Caleb stumbled backward, eyes wide with disbelief. The train was massive Engine 101, black and rusted, its smokestack broken, its wheels screeching like tortured metal. Sparks flew, the air filled with burning coal and diesel. The windows were shattered. Inside them faces, dozens of faces, eyes wide, mouths screaming, pale hands pressed against broken glass. The train thundered past him without slowing down. The force of the wind pushed him to the ground. The sound was deafening, and yet, underneath it, he could hear the whispers of the passengers pleading, crying, begging. Then, silence. The headlight vanished. The air stilled. The train was gone. Caleb stood shakily, heart pounding. What he had seen was impossible. It was a machine that no longer existed. A train that had crashed decades ago. A train whose passengers had never been found. He kept walking, trembling but unable to turn back. Something was pulling him forward, deeper into the darkness. A strange, invisible pressure urged him to continue. The tracks led to an old bridge. The wooden planks were missing, leaving only twisted metal beams. Below the bridge was a ravine, and at the bottom lay a rusted mass of crushed steel. Engine 101, the real wreck, not a ghost, the actual engine. The metal was mangled, blackened, frozen in time. As Caleb stared down at the wreck, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Fresh footprints, human footprints, dozens of them, leading away from the wreck, up the slope, toward the tracks. As if the passengers had climbed out recently, a cold whisper curled around his ear. "We never left." Caleb spun around, but no one was there. Still, a cold pressure gripped his shoulder. Invisible fingers tightened, pulling him closer to the edge. The tracks began to hum again. The ground vibrated. The ghost train was returning. The sound grew louder and louder, the horn, the wheels, the screams. The wind tore across the bridge. Caleb lost his footing and fell to his knees. The headlight reappeared, brighter this time, closer. The engine roared toward him, sparks flying from its wheels, its broken face twisted with rage. The passengers screamed silently behind shattered glass. The invisible hands pulled Caleb toward the ravine. He grabbed onto a metal beam, fighting desperately. His fingers slipped. The pressure increased. Then the train reached the bridge. A wall of white light swallowed him. Voices screamed his name. Cold air rushed into his lungs. And then everything stopped. The light vanished. The pressure released. The voices faded. The tracks fell silent. Caleb lay on the ground, gasping. The world returned. The night felt normal again. The wind blew gently across the plains, but the feeling of being watched lingered. He staggered back to his truck and drove away without looking back. He didn't speak. He didn't breathe. He didn't blink. He left Montana that night. But the story didn't end there, because locals later claimed they saw a new figure walking the silent line. At night, tall, thin, carrying a camera. Some said he looked lost. Some said he looked scared. And some said he wasn't alone. They heard footsteps beside him, and whispers, and the low, distant hum of a train that no longer exists, because once you hear the echoes on the rails, they never stop. Not for the passengers, not for the dead, and not for Caleb Turner, who, they say, sometimes still answers when the train calls his name. Night had fallen over the rolling hills of the American Midwest, and the old railroad tracks lay hidden under a thick blanket of fog. Few dared to walk these rails after dark. The towns nearby had all but forgotten the line, its stations abandoned and roofless, its wooden planks warped and decayed. Locals whispered of a ghostly figure, a signalman who haunted the tracks and warned travelers of approaching doom, but most dismissed it as superstition. Still, those who had ventured close at night returned with stories of a pale man in a tattered uniform, waving a lantern, his face hidden under the brim of a soaked, old-fashioned cap. Jonah Mills was a train enthusiast and a seeker of forgotten histories. He had traveled hundreds of miles to document abandoned lines, their rusted rails and overgrown ties, believing the stories to be nothing more than exaggerated tales. When he arrived at the abandoned town of Willow Creek, he parked his car near the remains of the old station. The fog was thick, swallowing the dim glow of his headlights. He grabbed his flashlight and camera and stepped onto the tracks, the wooden ties creaking beneath his boots. The first few minutes passed without incident. He explored the platforms and the remnants of the signal tower. Everything was silent, except the distant call of an owl. Then, at precisely 11:47 p.m., a sound echoed across the rails, soft metallic clink, rhythmic and deliberate. Jonah froze. He scanned the darkness. There was nothing, yet the clinks continued, moving steadily closer. He followed cautiously, the fog wrapping around him like a living thing. Through the mist, he saw a faint light swinging from side to side. A figure appeared, standing by the side of the tracks, motioning with a lantern. The uniform looked old, frayed at the cuffs, and wet from the heavy mist. Jonah felt an icy chill run down his spine. The man did not speak, but the gesture was clear. Stop. Do not proceed. Jonah hesitated, debating whether this was a prank, another lost hiker, or something far stranger. The light swung again, moving along the side of the tracks. The figure shifted, revealing a face pale as death, hollow eyes staring through the fog. Suddenly, the rails beneath Jonah vibrated faintly, a warning that felt almost alive. He turned to leave, but the path back had disappeared into fog. The world was quiet, except for the rhythmic clink of the figure's lantern tapping against the rail. He could hear whispers, faint and overlapping, as if many voices were speaking at once, warning him to turn back. The figure began walking slowly along the tracks, the lantern held high. The clinks of the metal echoed through the mist like a bell tolling a funeral. Jonah realized that whatever he was witnessing was not ordinary. This was no prank. The stories were true. The signalman was real, a ghost bound to these rails, tasked with warning travelers of approaching danger. Jonah's curiosity battled with his fear. He raised his camera and began recording. The figure stopped and turned slightly, as if acknowledging the lens. The face was gaunt, eyes hollow, mouth tight, yet he exuded a silent command. Jonah shivered. Every instinct screamed to leave, but he pressed on, documenting each step. The fog thickened. Shapes began to move around him, fleeting and shadowed, echoing the form of passengers long lost to time. He realized these were the spirits of travelers who had ignored the conductor's warning, those who had boarded trains that never reached their destination. Their faces were twisted in expressions of fear and regret, some reaching out as though pleading for him to heed the lantern. A distant sound grew louder, the chug of a steam engine, distant yet impossibly close. Jonah's heart raced. He knew this line had been abandoned for decades. There should be no train. The signalman lifted the lantern higher, tapping it rhythmically, and the clinking grew more urgent. Jonah stepped back as a gust of wind rose, carrying the faint smell of smoke and charred wood. The shadows around him writhed and shifted, forming vague shapes of passengers pressed against unseen windows, trapped in a train that moved through time rather than space. The signalman's lantern shone directly at Jonah, its light cutting through the fog like a blade. The train approached, not visible, yet undeniably present. The ground beneath Jonah vibrated with the momentum of unseen wheels. He could hear the metal grinding against rails, the hiss of steam escaping, and the faint chorus of voices from inside the spectral cars. Panic set in. He knew the stories now. Those who ignored the signalman's warning often vanished, their souls joining the train's endless journey. The signalman stepped aside, pointing furiously down the track. Jonah understood. The train was coming. He had a choice: proceed or retreat. Every nerve in his body screamed to run. He sprinted along the side of the tracks, the fog pressing close, the whispers growing louder. Behind him, the lantern's light bobbed, the signalman moving with him, a silent sentinel. And some nights, if you listen closely, the whispers grow louder. They speak directly to those nearby, carrying a simple message. Do not ignore the warning. Do not board the train. Jonah's story became a cautionary tale, one that circulates quietly among train enthusiasts and those who dare to explore abandoned lines. They speak of the signalman, the ghostly train, and the echoes on the rails, and they warn, when the fog rises thick over forgotten tracks, stay away, or you may hear the clinking of the lantern, see the hollow eyes of lost passengers, and feel the spectral pull of the silent line. No one who has experienced the signalman ever forgets. The vibration underfoot, the clinking on the rails, the spectral lanternal remain etched in the mind. Even decades later, the experience resurfaces in dreams, in sudden chills, in that eerie, fleeting sense of being watched. Those who try to explain it logically fail. Physics, reality, and technology cannot account for a train that exists without wheels touching the rails, without smoke, without fire, without mass. The stories insist it is real, anchored to this world only by memory, by fear, and by the undying presence of the ghostly conductor. Some believe the train itself is a curse, bound to the rails by tragedy and death. Others think it is a warning, a test of courage or fate, separating the curious from the doomed. The clinking of the lantern, the rhythmic steps of the conductor, and the whispering passengers are all signs of this enduring legend. Those who hear it report the same sensations: a sudden drop in temperature, fog thickening unnaturally, vibrations underfoot, the rhythmic clinking, and a voice calling from nowhere. And the instant you respond or hesitate, you feel the unseen pull, as if the rails themselves are drawing you closer to the ghost train. Jonah Mills never returned to the silent line, but he carried the memory forever. He often awoke at night with the faint echo of clinking metal, the ghostly lantern swinging, the conductor's warning resonating in his mind. His dreams were haunted by endless fog, spectral passengers, and a train moving through dimensions, impossible yet tangible. Locals continue to warn travelers, sharing whispered advice around campfires, in empty stations, and in the shadows of abandoned bridges. Respect the tracks, heed the lantern, and never ignore the clinking. For if you do, the ghostly signalman may appear, and the silent line will claim another soul. The night air over the abandoned rail lines was thick with mist. The moonlight barely pierced the fog, and the faint outlines of distant hills were swallowed by darkness. Travelers often ignored these parts of Montana, but there were always a few drawn to the unknown, the thrill of history, or the curiosity of places where the past still lingered in the air. Among them was Lila Harrington, a travel blogger and amateur historian, eager to document forgotten landmarks. She arrived with her friends on a chilly October evening, camera equipment in hand, the excitement of exploration keeping them warm. They had read stories of Engine 101, the ghost train that had vanished decades ago, and they were determined to capture the experience. Skeptical yet thrill-seeking, as they approached the old tracks, the wooden ties creaked softly beneath their boots, the fog clung to their clothes, and the air smelled faintly of damp earth and decayed leaves. Every step was deliberate. Lila raised her camera, capturing the mist rolling across the rails, the distant shadows of skeletal trees leaning over the line. "This is incredible," she whispered to her friends, her voice a soft thrill in the night. "It's like stepping into another century." The group paused at the remains of an old signal tower. Rusted levers and broken glass hinted at the once bustling life of the railroad. The wind moved through the gaps, creating a soft, rhythmic moan that could be mistaken for a ghostly whisper. They laughed nervously, trying to shake off the chill crawling up their spines, a long, drawn note echoing through the fog. The friends froze, holding their breaths. It wasn't the piercing cry of a modern train whistle. It was deep, mournful, the kind that seemed to carry grief from another time. "Did you hear that?" whispered Lila. Her friend Mark nodded, swallowing nervously. "Yeah, it's just a train, right?" But no living train had run here for decades. The whistle echoed again, closer this time, vibrating in their chests. The fog seemed to thicken, almost moving with the sound. Shadows shifted along the tracks, fleeting glimpses of shapes that were impossible to define. They began walking, staying close to each other. Lila narrated softly into her camera, her voice calm but tinged with awe. "Some say this line is haunted by the spirits of Engine 101, passengers who vanished that night. In 73 locals claim you can hear the whistle hours before the train arrives, and the sound can drive you to the tracks if you're not careful." As they moved along the rails, the sound of the whistle grew louder, closer, though still unseen. The vibration beneath their feet was subtle but unmistakable. Their steps slowed, hearts pounding, anticipation mixing with fear. The fog swirled, creating shapes that seemed to flicker just beyond the light of their flashlights. They reached an old trestle bridge, a favorite spot for adventurers, despite the danger. From the wooden beams, the group could see the tracks vanish into darkness. Here, the whistle was loudest, reverberating across the valley. The echo danced between hills and trees, a ghostly symphony that seemed to announce the train's presence before it ever appeared. Lila turned her camera toward the darkness. The fog shifted, and for a moment, they thought they saw the glimmer of windows in the distant tiny lights, impossibly far, moving ever closer. "Guys," another long whistle pierced the night, more mournful, more sorrowful, vibrating through the air like a living thing. Their breaths hung visible in the cold night air, their hearts sinking with the rhythm of a spectral heartbeat traveling along the tracks. Suddenly, the group noticed movement along the rails. Shadows twisted and shifted, forming vague shapes. Figures appeared, men, women, children dressed in old clothing, faces pale, eyes hollow. They were static at first, like statues, then slowly they moved, drifting forward as if walking to an invisible train. The friends froze, terrified and fascinated. Lila whispered into her camera, "These must be passengers." The whistle came again, long and echoing, almost pleading. Lila could feel the sound pressing against her chest, pulling at her senses. She realized then that the stories were not just legends. Something powerful lingered on these tracks, something alive in the echoes, something that called to the living like a siren. Her friends held her hands. The mist swirled around them, shaping forms that looked like the train's carriages, dark and endless. The vibration increased, subtle at first, then stronger, with each echoing note of the whistle. The world seemed to tilt slightly, the fog wrapping around them like a living blanket. A sudden movement made them gasp. A man in a conductor's uniform appeared on the side of the tracks, lantern in hand, glowing faintly through the mist. His face was pale, gaunt, eyes deep and hollow. He raised the lantern and swung it slowly, a rhythm that matched the whistle, a silent signal to stop or retreat. Leela's voice trembled. "It's the conductor." The signal was unmistakable. The ghostly man's gestures were urgent, commanding, impossible to ignore. Every instinct screamed at them to run. The shadows of the passengers shifted slightly toward the rails, moving as though the conductor had given permission to the train to advance. The distant whistle reached a crescendo. The vibration underfoot became palpable. The ground seemed to hum, alive with the force of an approaching presence. The air grew heavy, charged with electricity, carrying the faint scent of coal, metal, and something ancient. A single carriage appeared faintly through the fog. Its windows shattered, the edges blackened and twisted. Figures inside pressed their hands against the glass, mouths open in silent screams. The sound of their desperate cries seemed to layer over the whistle, creating a chilling symphony of loss and warning. The conductor's lantern tapped against the rails, producing a hollow, metallic echo that intertwined with the whistle. It was a warning and a signal. The friends understood immediately. Ignore this, and the train would claim them. Lila clutched her camera tighter. She wanted to capture everything, but fear had rooted her to the spot. Mark grabbed her arm. "We need to move now." They stepped backward carefully, keeping their eyes on the spectral train and the conductor. The fog twisted and swirled, trying to obscure the path, but the lantern's glow guided them. Every echo of the whistle reverberated in their bones, a pulse they could not ignore. As they moved away, the train advanced ever so slowly, never fully appearing, yet always present. Each whistle note grew fainter as they gained distance, yet the hum of the rails remained, a subtle vibration marking the lingering presence of the lost engine. Once clear of the trestle, the friends collapsed onto the grassy embankment, breathless, shaken, yet alive. They dared a glance back. The fog had swallowed the tracks completely. The whistle had faded. The conductor, the passengers, the train, they were gone. Lila reviewed her footage later. The video captured nothing. Extraordinary empty tracks, fog, distant shadows. Yet, when she played the audio carefully, the faint, layered sound of a train whistle, the tapping of a lantern, and soft, overlapping whispers could be heard. It was proof enough. The legend was real. In the following days, locals reported sightings of ghostly lights along the tracks, the faint echo of a whistle at odd hours, and silhouettes of passengers walking slowly, eternally waiting for a train that never truly arrives. Some who ventured to the silent line at night never returned, lured by the haunting calls of the whistle. Others came back, pale and shaken, recounting the chilling echoes and the ghostly conductor, warning that the line should be approached with caution, respect, and fear. The silent line remains today, hidden, forgotten, yet alive in the mist, in the echoes, and in the spectral warning of the conductor. And travelers like Lila, who dare to listen, may never forget the haunting music of engine 101, the whistle that precedes its arrival, the vibration beneath their feet, and the silent message of the lost passengers. Some lines